Welcome everybody to the 2025 NFL Draft here in the St. Louis Dragons franchise here on Madden 24. This is our second draft of the series. Our first draft obviously ended up being a major success, drafting our franchise quarterback and the defensive rookie of the year. And here we've got another really fun group of players entering the NFL. In case you missed the draft preview and would like more context on this draft class as a whole, I will leave a card at the top right of your screen for that episode for you to check out. If you would like to download the draft class, it is available on the PS5 Vault. It's called Dragons Draft 2, spelled as it is on screen with all caps. And if you would like to check out any draft class from the series, type in my PSN, again spelled as it is on screen. There are quite a few glitches with the first draft class. Thankfully, there aren't many issues with the second draft class, so you should be able to download it, and all the players' likenesses should be saved and whatnot. I am considering making a separate version of the second class, but with Puma Whitlock and Simeon Bonnet, just for those of you who don't want to put in all the effort of fixing the faces of the first draft, and you can still use those two players. So stay tuned on the lookout for that. I plan to put that in the vault within the next 24 hours. So with that, we can get this show on the road. The 2025 NFL Draft is now officially open, and it's the New Orleans Saints on the clock with the number 1 pick. It's not a very well-kept secret that this selection is going to be a quarterback. The question is, which one? Callaghan October and Dasani Madison have both won Heisman trophies throughout their college careers. Callaghan October is the more physically talented player. He's bigger, he's faster, he's got the stronger arm. But Dasani Madison's the guy who just led his team to the national championship, having the greatest statistical season in college football history. He did skip the NFL Combine for really no specific reason, but after the year he had, doesn't really matter. After those two, we should see a run on defensive linemen with some offensive tackles, corners, and receivers sprinkled throughout the first round, and the Dragons waiting at pick 10. So with the number 1 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the New Orleans Saints select Callaghan October, quarterback out of the University of Michigan. So when it's all said and done, the Saints got their guy, and it is Callaghan October who goes number 1. October is one of the most physically talented quarterbacks the NFL really has ever seen. 6'5", 240 pounds. He's got a cannon of an arm. He ran a 4.5 40-yard dash, which is unreal at his size, and he is explosive as a runner. But what really separates him is his polish as a passer. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the country. He can make plays under pressure. The one question with him, though, is he a winner? We've seen top QB prospects like Puma Whitlock and Dasani Madison and Otto Askew lead their teams to championships. October never did that at Michigan despite being a 4-year starter. Let's see what he can do in New Orleans. With the second pick, the Cleveland Browns select Dasani Madison, quarterback out of the University of Alabama. So the Browns have their choice made for them, but I don't think they're going to complain too much because Dasani Madison would probably be the number 1 overall pick 9 out of every 10 years. Unfortunately for him, Callaghan October is in this draft class. Madison is coming off the greatest statistical season in NCAA history, throwing for 77 touchdowns, leading the Crimson Tide to a national championship. He's a 77 overall. So physically, he doesn't have the upside that Callaghan October does, but he is still very, very good. This likely means Deshaun Watson will be on his way out, and there is an irony to this pick. The Browns haven't picked in the first round since they traded for Deshaun Watson. The receivers here in Cleveland are not great at all. The Browns have not been able to spend money because the Deshaun Watson contract has handicapped them, but with this good of a quarterback prospect on the board, how are you supposed to say no? And Madison will be the future of the Cleveland Browns. The two quarterbacks are off the board, and now the Colts are on the clock. They select Russell Bradshaw out of Baylor, the first surprise of the draft. And I don't think the Colts are too upset. He's an 81 overall, albeit with only normal development. So he's basically last year's Simeon Bonnet, but he's 50 pounds lighter. Russell Bradshaw is a phenomenal pass rusher, but I think we all would have expected this to be the LSU defensive tackle, Sir Broderick Hillingham, arguably the best defensive prospect since Ndamukong Suh. So he falls right to the Steelers. However, Pittsburgh is not going to take him. Instead, they select Chandre Bigsley, the edge rusher out of Minnesota. And again, this is not a bad pick at all. Bigsley's going to be a pretty good player, coming in as a 77 overall with hidden development. But I am really surprised to see Hillingham fall out of the top 4. This is a guy who we described as a generational defensive tackle prospect and somebody who was legitimately in the Heisman conversation as a defensive player. He performed well at the Combine, so there's really no visible reason for him to be slipping. This is certainly odd, and I'm curious to see how this story potentially progresses. So the Rams had a chance to pair him up with Aaron Donald and Josh Allen on that pass rush, and they are going to go in a different direction. It's Jake Louis, the offensive tackle out of Alabama. Louis is the best pass protector in this draft. He's a 79 overall and looks like an absolute beast. He could be a top 10 right tackle right away. However, I am still a little bit surprised by this with Sir Broderick Hillingham still on the board. So now the Buccaneers have a chance to pair him up with last year's number 1 pick, Solomane Samaro, and they will choose to not do that, selecting Josh Okuwala, the offensive tackle out of the University of Central Florida. He's probably the second best pass protector in this draft and will be the blindside blocker for lefty quarterback Deacon Adderley. Again, in a vacuum, this isn't a bad pick at all. However, it's surprising when you consider in the fact that Sir Broderick Hillingham is still on the board, and clearly there's a reason for his fall. It's not a team liking another prospect over him. There must be some new concern that has come out about him over the last few days. His fall finally comes to an end as he's going to be the 7th pick in the draft to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't think the Jags could have expected this in their best possible dreams coming into the draft. Hillingham has been a total game wrecker at LSU. You talk about somebody who is a force in the middle of the defensive line. He won them games last year. However, I wasn't entirely truthful with him as a prospect. He's a 63 overall. So he has all the pass rush moves. He has all the athleticism. The problem with him, how do I put this nicely, is that he might be the dumbest person on the entire planet. His awareness is a 36. His play rec is a 39. I will say there is probably some upside here. He has hidden development. He's a good athlete. He's got a toolbox of pass rushing moves, but he very clearly relied on his athleticism and his sheer dominance at LSU, and you're not going to get away with that in the NFL. So those 4 teams who passed on him clearly recognized that he was not the player that we thought he was, and the Jaguars caught the bait. So with the 8th pick, the Lions are looking to potentially shop this pick. Middle Tennessee State wide receiver Matthias Abanda is the apple of many teams' eyes. The Dragons did send an offer looking to move up 2 spots along with other teams as well. The Niners offered a package including Trey Lance along with their top 2 picks. The Giants gave a lucrative package as well. But ultimately, it's going to be the Carolina Panthers moving up 7 spots to acquire the 8th pick in this year's draft. So the Lions will be trading away picks 8 and 74. That 3rd rounder comes from us in the Jamison Williams trade earlier this offseason. Carolina, meanwhile, will send the 15th pick, their 4th rounder, and a 2nd in next year's draft. So Carolina, who does not have a 2nd this year, is still able to move up to acquire the 8th overall pick. And indeed, it is going to be Matthias Abanda, the wide receiver out of Middle Tennessee State. He had an unbelievable senior season. You look at a guy who's big, fast, explosive. He can run routes. He can separate. He checks off all the boxes at wide receiver, and he's a 78 overall with hidden development. I think Carolina is going to be very happy that they chose to be aggressive, go up, and get Bryce Young a legit number 1 receiver, because unfortunately, I don't think Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo are quite alpha receivers in this league, and Thielen's like 35 years old, so he wouldn't work anyway. The Cincinnati Bengals really wanted Matthias Abanda. They've got to be devastated. They're going to stick at wide receiver, though, with Corn Carlson III out of Iowa. Another major surprise here, Carlson was not projected to go probably until the 20s. The Bengals clearly wanted a receiver badly, which is kind of odd because that's probably their strongest position. The Bengals had one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL last year, despite having a top 10 pick. The problem with this team was their defense, and they had so many choices. on the defensive side of the ball. Tayron Wilson out of Florida State was supposed to be a top 5 pick. They could have had any corner in the draft. There were plenty of pass rushers available, and that's no disrespect to Corin Carlson. He's an awesome player, but I just don't really get that pick for Cincinnati. I think they kind of panicked with Abanda off the board. So with that, the St. Louis Dragons are on the clock here at number 10. A lot of the offensive talent has been picked. The top 2 receivers and top 2 offensive tackles are gone. All of the best players on the board pretty much are on the defensive side of the ball, which I think is the bigger area of need for the Dragons. They addressed offensive line in free agency, they traded for Jameson Williams, but they haven't really touched the defensive side of the ball. There's so many good defensive prospects left on the board, though. The Dragons feel that they can maximize this asset by moving down and still getting a potential blue chip defensive player. So that's exactly what we're going to try to do, and ultimately I found a deal I like with the Chicago Bears, who had the 16th pick in the draft. So we'll be giving away picks 10 and 202, our 7th rounder, and we'll be receiving picks 16, 80, and 132. The Bears have 4 picks on day 2. However, I don't think we realistically could have gotten 2 of those selections along with their first rounder, and I wanted to make it a point to stay in the first round and likely get one of these elite defensive prospects. Rather than choosing, I'm going to let the board fall to us and add a 3rd and 5th rounder. We traded away our 3rd to get Jameson Williams, so now we get a 3rd rounder back. With the 10th pick, the Chicago Bears select Mamaruk Ezeli, the defensive tackle out of Clemson. I think this trade is going to end up being a win-win. For us, we got what we wanted. We moved down, we added some extra picks. For the Bears, they got a monster in the middle. Ezeli's going to be the significantly better player in the NFL compared to Sir Broderick Hillingham, and Ezeli's going to be one of the 5 or 6 best players in this draft. He's a phenomenal run stopper with real pass rushing and athletic upside, and the Bears just got themselves a stud. Tayron Wilson is off the board to the Broncos. He was supposed to go in the top 5. However, with the offensive talent being picked, Wilson ends up slipping a little bit. The Broncos are not going to be upset by this result, as he's the selection here at 11. That'll bring up the Tennessee Titans with the 12th pick in the draft, and they're going to select the top corner off the board with Christian Kennedy out of the University of Oregon. Kennedy put on a show at the Combine with his 6'3", 196-pound frame. He's a solid cover player, but what I really like about him is his physicality, his versatility, and his ball skills. The Titans are getting an absolute stud here at corner, and all these defensive players are starting to fall off the board. Maybe we shouldn't have traded down. There's only a couple left, one of whom is Gunther Zimmerman. He's off the board to the Seahawks. Gunther Zimmerman plays a lot like Jamal Adams. Now, I will say, Jamal Adams is not 6'7". So I think Gunther Zimmerman's going to kind of take that role as your sort of sub-linebacker. Jamal Adams was traded to the Steelers in free agency, and now Seattle gets their replacement. The 4 guys who had just been picked were all heavy on the Dragons' radar. Is St. Louis seriously regretting this trade? With the 14th pick, the Miami Dolphins will select Devin Lewine, the tight end out of Oregon. I think he's going to be really fun in this offense. We've described him as a unicorn type of talent, and unfortunately, based off of his initial ratings and development trait, I don't think we're looking at the potential superstar that we thought we were when we scouted him. Nonetheless, I think the Dolphins is going to be a really nice fit, and he's going to add another vertical element to their offense. 1 pick away, it's the Detroit Lions on the clock here at number 15. They moved back. They don't have a quarterback on their roster until now. Amari August out of USC goes to Detroit. August is dynamic as a runner, and he significantly improved as a passer during his final year with the Trojans. Now, unfortunately for the Lions, August is going to come in a lot more raw than they would have hoped for. He has a lot of work to do as a processor. His arm strength is not necessarily NFL starting caliber. Is it possible that the Lions reached on their quarterback of the future here in the first round? He does have hidden development, and so I do think there is a world where he becomes a good player, but I think the Lions should probably look to sign somebody in free agency to potentially groom or mentor him, because he's got a lot of work to do. So that'll bring up the St. Louis Dragons here with the 16th pick. We traded back from 10, and a lot of the really good defensive players were picked. The reason why the Dragons traded back is because they still wanted to acquire a premium defensive talent. The Dragons believe that there is a player down the board who is just as good, if not better, than the defensive players who were selected after the trade down from pick 10. The Dragons clearly have a lot of confidence in this player, so let's see who it's going to be. With the 16th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select defensive back Cam Lucifer II out of the University of South Carolina. The Dragons are going to start their second draft by going in the secondary. This is a very deep cornerback class, so the way I look at it is we're going to have some guys fall who really shouldn't fall. I think Cam Lucifer is one of the 10 best players in this draft, and I view him as highly as those defensive players who were drafted after we traded down. I knew we could wait a little bit to get him, and sure enough, our guy falls to the 16th pick. Cam Lucifer is the best cover player in this draft, and I don't think it's close. I don't think he has the physical upside of somebody like Christian Kennedy, who was already drafted, or some of the other corners in this class. However, he is just such a rock-solid cover player, and I think his floor in the NFL is going to be really high. He's good in man and zone. I think his ability in man will make him favor man coverage schemes, but he can do both. He won the Jim Thorpe Award this past season as the best defensive back in college football without recording an interception. I think that speaks volumes to how good he is as a cover player. The ball skills are the one area of his game that's weak. He doesn't really have to track the ball a whole lot because quarterbacks don't really throw the ball his way. He only has one career interception, that was last year as a sophomore against USC, for a pick 6. While I wouldn't call him a freak athlete, he's definitely not a bad one either. He led all corners in the bench press at the combine, showing off his physicality. He ran a 4.44 40-yard dash, followed by a 4.37 at his pro day. I think he's got pretty good short area quickness and overall good explosiveness. And while maybe he's not necessarily some freak of nature, I think his high floor is going to lead to him being a really good player right off the bat. He is just so steady and so solid in coverage, and I think he's got a shot to potentially start on the outside right away for the Dragons. He's going to come in as a 77 overall, and the attributes across the board look pretty good. The tackle rating is a little bit low, although he gives great effort in the run game. He only has 55 catching. That's the big weakness. He's not going to force a bunch of turnovers, but it's not going to matter if his side of the field is completely shunned by the opposing quarterback because he's that good in coverage. I feel like we made ourselves a great first-round pick here with Cam Lucifer, and I'm excited to see what he can do on our defense. Let's move forward now as the Minnesota Vikings, with the 17th pick, select Shadarius Fowler out of The Ohio State University. Fowler is a very athletic player who is a freak for his size, and him and Marmarouk Azili were kind of compared to each other throughout the pre-draft process, and it looks like Azili is going to be the better player of the two, being that he's rated higher and has a dev trait. With the 18th pick, the New York Jets select former walk-on turned first-rounder Lucas Corbin out of the University of Oklahoma. So the Jets are going to get younger in the pass rush, and they've invested a lot of high picks here with guys like Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson, and now Corbin is the next up on the list. I think the Jets are going to hope he can develop a little bit more play strength so he can line up as a defensive end within their 4-3 scheme. That'll bring up the Washington Commanders with the 19th pick, and they select quarterback Juan Escalés Salazar out of Middle Tennessee State. I think this is a really good fit for the Commanders. They signed Kirk Cousins last year to a 1-year contract, and he led them to a playoff spot. Cousins may be gone, but I think Juan Escalés Salazar actually shares a lot of similarities. He's one of the most poised pocket passers in this year's draft. He's not going to win with his physical traits, but he's accurate, he's steady, and he can really push the ball down the field. I think Escalés Salazar will have a great opportunity to compete with Sam Howell for the starting job in Washington, and I would expect he will start for them in Week 1. I think he's the perfect replacement after a year of Kirk Cousins, and he should be able to keep the Commanders very competitive in the NFC. The Philadelphia Eagles select Marcus Jackson, linebacker out of Texas Tech. Did Howie Roseman just spend a first-rounder on an off-ball linebacker in this economy? He must clearly be high on Marcus Jackson, and I don't blame him. Jackson looks like an awesome player, and I think he's going to be a great fit in the middle of that Eagles defense. The New York Giants select Monikar Monterey out of Michigan State. One of the biggest pre-draft risers, Monterey was barely a top 100 pick going into the offseason. I think he's going to be more of an off-ball linebacker, so he's going to slide inside. Good run stopper, improving in coverage. I think he's going to be a pretty good player. With the 22nd pick, the Las Vegas Raiders select Jacoby Cunningham, the safety out of the Ohio State. The third Buckeye defender off the board here in the first round, and the second safety. While Gunther Zimmerman, who was drafted by Seattle, is more of a hybrid type of player, Cunningham is more of your traditional cover safety. I think he can play free and strong. Tristan Whitlock, cornerback out of Alabama, goes to the Buffalo Bills. He's one of the most pro-ready defensive players in this year's draft, and the fun story with him is that going into the offseason, him and Puma Whitlock actually trained together, and they had never known each other prior despite having the same name. Turns out they took a DNA test because they discovered a lot of similarities, and they're second cousins. Pretty cool story. It would have been even cooler if we drafted him, but instead, he ends up in Buffalo. With the 24th pick, we've got another trade. The Bengals will be sending away pick 41 along with their second rounder next year to move up 17 spots. This is a great haul for the Chargers, who don't really have a clear target at this stage in the draft, with a lot of the offensive skill position players projected to go later. The Bengals need defense bad. They drafted offense with their top pick, so presumably they've got to look for the defensive side of the ball, and they will do that with Yoro Diallo, the defensive tackle out of Michigan State. I think in 10 years from now, when we look at the best value first-rounders in this draft class, Yoro Diallo's name is going to be on the list. He's a really impressive athlete, and I think he's going to be a really solid pass rusher. He doesn't really provide a whole lot on early downs, but he can hunt the quarterback. Christian Banks, cornerback out of Florida, goes to the Houston Texans. He's only a 72 overall, which feels a little bit underwhelming, but he's a freak. 6'2", nearly 200 pounds. He's fast, he's quick, he just needs to be more consistent in coverage, but he does have some of the better ball skills amongst corners in this draft. Speaking of corners, we've got another one. Cormani Bowman out of Texas goes to the Packers. Another physical freak. These last two players drafted probably are more athletic than Cam Lucifer, and they both have better ball skills, but neither of them are anywhere near as good in coverage as Lucifer is. The 49ers are on the clock, but not for long. We've got a trade. The Eagles will be moving up 6 spots, sending a 3rd and 6th to San Francisco, while the Niners will be sending, obviously, this pick along with a 4th. The Eagles currently have 4 picks on day 3. They don't need all these third-rounders. They have a clear target in mind, and that's going to be safety Shomore Dubukuji from South Carolina, Cam Lucifer's teammate in the South Carolina secondary. So the Eagles just used their first-rounders on an off-ball linebacker and a free safety. For a guy who preaches positional value, Howie Roseman really went away from that in this draft, and I think it's going to prove to be a success. That shows that the Eagles clearly love these two players, and for good reason. They are both phenomenal. DeMarco Zuberi off the board here to the Kansas City Chiefs, looking to add some more offensive line for Patrick Mahomes. Zuberi's a pretty solid pass protector, and he's only 21 years old. He does struggle against quicker and more athletic edge rushers, but he really knows how to win his matchups with guys who lack that quickness and explosiveness. Ethan McKnight out of Michigan, another tackle off the board to the Ravens. I think we could see a run on offensive linemen here at the end of the first round, with a lot of them projected as fringe first-rounders. Ronnie Stanley's getting a little bit older, and obviously he's had a hard time staying on the field throughout his career. So the Ravens are going to look to get younger with Ethan McKnight, who was a major riser throughout this pre-draft process, and sure enough, he will end up in the first round. The Atlanta Falcons select Luciano Bustamante out of Middle Tennessee State, one of the best run defenders in this year's draft. He was amongst college football's leaders in tackles for loss, entering the draft as a late addition at just 21 years old. I think he does kind of rely on his strength and pure power a little bit too much as a pass rusher, but I do think there is some upside there as the Falcons add to the defensive line. Ja'Kai McClain, tackle out of UCLA, goes to the Dallas Cowboys. The defending NFC champions are looking to get stronger on the offensive line after losing Tyron Smith to the Dragons. I think McClain is actually a pretty similar prospect to Tyler Smith, who they drafted in the first round a few years ago, as a guy who played tackle in college, but if you look at him, really profiles more as a guard. The defending champion New England Patriots select Andreas Butte, the center out of East Carolina. New England is looking to add to the trenches, and they got themselves a starting caliber player here at the end of the first round as they look to potentially repeat and win their 8th Super Bowl championship. So that will wrap up the first round of the draft. Certainly a fun one with Callaghan October and Dasani Madison going 1-2 to the Saints and the Browns. Sir Broderick Hillingham falling all the way to 7 just to be a 63 overall. The Dragons trading down, passing on some of the best defensive players in this draft to ultimately go with Cam Lucifer II, the corner out of South Carolina. Now that we're out of the first round, obviously we're going to start to move a lot faster. There's still plenty of talent on the board here in the second round. The Dragons currently own their own second rounder, number 10 overall, so they should not have to wait too long to pick. They've already drafted a defensive back, so let's see what they look to do here with pick 42 on the horizon. There are some reports coming out from the Dragons camp that they are shopping this pick. They really want to move up or move down. It looks like they have a target who could go off the board pretty soon. Jumani Kaur is the first pick in the second round to the Niners. I definitely want to highlight this pick because I think he's going to be an awesome fit in this offense. There are some real similarities to Brandon Ayuk, who obviously left in free agency to sign with the Houston Texans. Kaur should be able to replace him and really complement Deebo Samuel very nicely in this receiving core. I really like what the Niners did, moving down and still getting probably the guy they would have selected at pick 27. The Browns select another receiver, DeSancho Chamberlain out of the University of Alabama. Wide receiver is the biggest need on this roster, especially because they have the rookie quarterback. Why not pair him up with his number 1 receiver in college? The Alabama connection reunites in Cleveland. The Colts will select Ibrahim Lukosar, talented pass rusher out of Cal. The Steelers add Tumani Sumaro, the brother of last year's number 1 overall pick, Solomane Sumaro. The Rams add Alder Jordan, the safety out of Louisiana Lafayette. The Buccaneers, here with the 6th pick in the round, select Amarion Cephas, the wide receiver out of Georgia. This was the guy who the Dragons were eyeing up. He would have been their selection, and they considered trading up for him. He looks pretty good, 74 overall. He's athletic. He's a good route runner, solid hands, good separator. I don't think he's like some can't-miss guy, but it does kind of suck missing out on him because he looks really good. The Jacksonville Jaguars, after making a colossal mistake in the first round, are going to move back a few spots, adding a 4th rounder with the Denver Broncos, who are trading up for a quarterback. Zachariah Drake out of the University of Cincinnati is going to the Broncos. Denver let go of Russell Wilson this offseason. They signed Derek Carr, but obviously he's not the answer. If only Drake had higher than normal development, I'd be really confident in him, but I still like the skill set. Really athletic, he's fast, he's got a strong arm, he's a good improviser, and he's pretty accurate. I think despite the fact that he's got normal development, he's going to be a really good quarterback in the NFL, and it's only a matter of time until he is starting games for the Broncos. The Detroit Lions, here with the 8th pick in round 2, select Virgil Deese. Suck on Deese nuts! Wide receiver out of Washington State, projected as a fringe draftable player at the beginning of the draft cycle, the biggest riser in the entire class. And then Gaffey Quentin out of Auburn, the top running back, is off the board here to the Chargers, who have had trouble replacing Austin Eckler, who left a few years ago. So the Dragons are now on the clock with the 10th pick in the second round. Amarion Cephas was our target. There are some other guys who we do like down the board, but similarly to the first round, I think we can get them later. We're going to move down 9 spots with the Washington Commanders, trading one of our, I think, 5 picks in the 5th round. I've lost count at this point. It's too many. We're going to be acquiring a 3rd rounder next year, though, along with, obviously, their 2nd rounder here. So to move down 9 spots, we're giving away one of our day 3 picks, but we're adding a top 100 selection in next year's draft. Pretty exciting. So seeing that Gaffey Quentin went off the board, the Commanders really wanted to make sure they got one of the best running backs as they're moving up for L.J. Allen out of USC. The Jaguars, who moved back a little bit ago, select Malafinos Rukmini out of Old Dominion. Zaire Diaz-Holloway from Kansas is off the board of the Titans. Seattle selects Salamani Bali out of Alabama. Along with losing Jamal Adams, they also lost Quandre Diggs, who signed with the Eagles, and now they have their 2 new safeties. Sexton Hardcastle, the guard, goes to the Dolphins. The Bears with back-to-back picks select Chris Gentry out of Memphis and Des Cord, the physically talented wide receiver out of the Ohio State University. The Minnesota Vikings select Talufu Gafpia out of Washington. We liked him a lot. And then Jamiron Barber, the defensive tackle out of Alabama, goes to the Jets. Our target 9 picks ago is still on the board. I really liked the guard from Washington. He would have been my backup plan, but the guy who I've been eyeing up since Cephas went off the board is still here. With the 51st pick at the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Samasoni Saluni, defensive back out of the University of Southern California. So the Dragons are going back into the secondary, selecting Saluni, the talented safety out of USC. He's 6'4", 225 pounds, and he's a total freak. The athleticism is certainly the first thing that pops when you watch him on film. I think he's a pretty solid cover player, and he knows how to use his size and quickness to his advantage. He's a little bit inconsistent in coverage, but I think he's got intriguing upside despite only having normal development. I think he could look to improve in the run game, but he has shown some flashes there. He's a pretty hard hitter, and he knows how to play the football as a run defender and in coverage. He obviously can play zone, playing safety, and I think he can play strong and free safety. So although the rating is going to look initially kind of underwhelming as a 73, only having normal development at 23 years old, I still really like this pick because of the athleticism and because of the upside in coverage and as a run defender, and he'll get to compete to start at either safety spot with Darnell Savage and Jordan Whitehead. I think Saluni could end up being a really good piece of our secondary, and we have significantly improved our pass defense here in the first 2 rounds of this draft. Let's go forward as the Eagles select Serge Gevorgian, the tackle out of Virginia. Miko Alexander, running back out of Georgia to the Giants. He's a 78 overall. Does that mean Saquon Barkley could be on the move? Baba Matumko goes to the Raiders. Devontae Clemens off the board to Buffalo. Inzuma Mitsugu to the Chargers, the guard. Ito Bowden, tight end out of Michigan State, goes to the Houston Texans. The Packers get Malachi Weston, the talented pass rusher from Oklahoma. Jalen Fox to the Niners. San Fran continues to kill this draft. Cyril Collier to the Chiefs. And then Javon Malibu off the board to the Baltimore Ravens. This is a very fascinating pick. Malibu's a really physically intriguing player, 6'7". Now, the ratings aren't going to look the best. He doesn't really know how to play to his frame. He plays like he's 6'2", which can be looked as a bad thing, but it can also be looked as a good thing. His body control at his size is legitimately unbelievable. Just a few more picks to go here in the second as the Falcons will look to move back with the Bears, and this is a really interesting deal. Atlanta needs off-ball linebackers really bad, so they're going to get TJ Edwards and the Bears' 3rd round pick for this selection in the 2nd round, along with a 5th. And the Bears select Kyer Moore, the running back out of LSU. Austin Moore, corner out of Ohio State, goes to Dallas, and then Bubba Watkins, the big run stopper, goes to the New England Patriots. So that'll wrap up the 2nd round. 1 quarterback, a whole lot of offensive skill position players. As for the Dragons, they move back and they select safety Samasoni Saluni out of USC. Entering today, the Dragons did not have a pick in the 3rd round, but that changed thanks to our trade back with Chicago back in round 1. There's still plenty of talent on the board on both sides of the ball. The Dragons have doubled down on defense so far. Will they go back to the defensive side of the ball, or will they look to help Puma Whitlock in the offense here in round 3? We'll start with the Saints, who did not have a 2nd rounder because they love handing their picks to the Eagles, as they select Raphael Pryor-Swan, a wide receiver from Tennessee. Callaghan October surely is going to be excited about that pick. The Cleveland Browns are up next, but before we get to them, let's talk about Deshaun Watson, because he's going to be traded. They're not going to keep him and Madison. The only team who is left out of the QB carousel is the Los Angeles Rams. So they will be acquiring Watson and this selection, number 66 overall, for 2 4th-round picks. So the value is going to look confusing. Watson and this 3rd for 2 4s? But let me explain. Deshaun Watson is making a lot of money over the next couple of years. He's not really a positive asset. So the Rams are going to be paying a large chunk of that deal, but they don't have to give up any premium picks, and they get an early selection here in the 3rd. Kyle Soze going to the Steelers, I think, is going to end up being one of the best picks in the draft. A 1st-round talent who slipped because he did not perform at the Combine, but he's going to show that you can't base the Combine off of your final evaluation, and sometimes tape don't lie, and that's certainly the case here with Kyle Soze. The Steelers have drafted 3 players so far, all of whom are on the defensive line. Finnegan Howell Coleman, big athletic defensive tackle, goes to the Eagles. Popeye Tickleton ends up in Jacksonville, one of the best names in the entire draft. The Seattle Seahawks are going to look to move up here with the Carolina Panthers, exchanging their 4th rounder into a 3rd, while the Panthers will get Boye Mafe. The Panthers need another edge rusher really badly, and Mafe doesn't really have a clear path to playing time this year in Seattle. Pick 74 has been moved a whole lot in this offseason. This was originally our pick. Then it was traded to Detroit for Jameson Williams. Then the Lions sent it to Carolina as part of the earlier draft day trade, and now it ends up in Seattle. The Seahawks ended up trading up for Hugo Diaz, a guard, and then they add Deshaun Lee, a linebacker from Colorado, with their other 3rd. Ja'Cory White to the Panthers, I think, is going to be a really nice pick. The talented nickel corner out of Florida State. And that'll bring the St. Louis Dragons up here with the 16th pick in the 3rd round. There are a number of players we like here, but we're actually not going to trade down. We are going to stick and pick, looking to add some juice to the offensive side of the ball. With the 16th pick in round 3, the 80th overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select wide receiver Arturo Modelo out of the University of Miami. What time is it, boys and girls? It's Modelo time in St. Louis. The Dragons add another receiver with the talented Arturo Modelo, who should be able to add another talented piece to the offense. Jameson Williams is a fun addition, but this receiving core still needs more. Arturo Modelo is a really fun player. He's 6'1", 192 pounds, and he's kind of the jack of all trades. He has the ability of smaller receivers who really can make plays in space with the ball in their hands, but he knows how to use his size as well. He's a pretty good route runner, and he's one of the best separators in the entire draft. The one problem is that his hands are really not that good. He drops a few too many easy passes, but I think in comparison to route running and obviously athleticism and separating ability, those things are harder to be taught. Catching can absolutely be taught, and I think Arturo Modelo is going to be in a good position where he can improve his hands. He doesn't necessarily need a super big role right away, but I think he could very well be a long-term starter on this team with his overall explosiveness. Coming in as a 72 overall, so again, not a super high rating, but I do really like this player. I really believe in his skill set, and I think he's going to be a fun addition to our receiving core with Michael Gallup, Jameson Williams, Griffin Weaver, Greg Dortch, and Tykeem Keon Jr. That's a great group of 6, and possibly 1 or 2 of those guys gets moved. So Arturo Modelo will be added to the offense. The Dragons adding some weaponry for their young quarterback. The Dragons had the 16th pick in the 1st and 3rd rounds today. Let's simulate forward a little bit now. Here's the Niners selecting Dexter Sanders, running back out of Alabama. He was the next guy on our board after Arturo Modelo, and he ends up being a beast. I don't necessarily regret picking Arturo Modelo, but if Dexter Sanders ends up running all over us in San Francisco, then maybe we will have second thoughts. The other guy I really liked was Turbert Cheddar, the guard out of Ole Miss, going to the Raiders, and he ended up being a 76. So in terms of rating, you could argue we made the wrong pick. I still really like Arturo Modelo, but the 2 other guys we consider drafting look like total animals. Kitty Waters goes to the Niners. Weston Cincy, the talent receiver out of Cincinnati, goes to the Chiefs. Marcus Kidd, fringe first rounder, finally off the board. He ends up in Baltimore. The Falcons draft a running back, Jazir Salam out of Oregon State. And then Giovanni Gavincheco, the freak athlete running back out of Pitt, goes to New Orleans. So that'll wrap up the 3rd round. The Dragons stick and pick at 80th overall, adding the talented wide receiver Arturo Modelo out of the University of Miami. That'll bring us into day 3, and I think this is really where the Dragons can make some noise because they've got a whole lot of selections on day 3, just like last year. We are the hoarders of 5th round picks. We currently have 4, along with our own selection in the 4th and a 6th rounder as well. The Saints have added some weapons for their young quarterback. They will start things off in the 4th round, and there are some surprises still on the board, particularly at running back and cornerback. I told you guys the corners were going to slip because there's so many good ones, but I'm a little bit surprised about some of these running backs like Markel Taylor-Williams and Martez Alcott still on the board. So let's do some simulating. Jamal Jarrett, the safety out of Iowa State, goes to the New Orleans Saints. He's a 77 overall, tied for the highest rating of any player drafted on day 3. The Texans draft a quarterback, Bryce Church. He'll be the backup for C.J. Stroud. Rashard Hobart to the Colts. He's the other 77 overall here on day 3. Zion Onwuloglu to the Seahawks. They've had a great draft, completely fixing up their secondary. Markel Taylor-Williams finally off the board to the Buccaneers. Bernie Dutch goes to the Jaguars. Elijah Sutton, the running back, to Detroit. And then the Bengals get Drogo Mills, keeping him in the state of Ohio. That'll bring up the Dragons here with the 10th pick in the 4th round. There's a lot of players we like still on the board. And again, you can make the argument of trading down. But there's one guy who I really like, who I think is going to be selected pretty soon, who we did not want to miss out on. With the 10th pick in the 4th round of the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Jabril Fofana, linebacker out of the University of Nebraska. A really interesting pick early in the 4th round. Fofana is one of the more polarizing players in this draft class because of his frame. 6'7", 215 pounds. The way I view this prospect is that he is a moldable piece of clay. If we want him to bulk up and be an edge rusher for us, I think he's got the athleticism to do that. He would need to develop as a pass rusher, but I think it's possible. He's a solid run defender. He's a big hitter. He's strong. He's physical. And we've seen the flashes from him in coverage, which aren't normal for a guy who's 6'7". Add on with the fact that he's only 21 years old, one of the youngest players in this draft, and we could be getting a really interesting player. To start, I think he's going to be mostly a special teamer this year, sort of taking over the role for Leo Chanel. But I think long-term he could become a starter for us, but the question is where? He has so many different talents, but there's not really one thing he's super good at. He's only a 70 overall, but I think he's got a lot of room to grow. And I think this could end up being a really fascinating pick for us down the line. So Jabril Fofana will be added to the defense here to kick off day 3 in the 4th round. Let's do some more simulating now. Tucker Ainsworth to the Broncos. That's going to be a really good pick. The talented tackle out of Auburn. Carolina picks a quarterback. Lang Buddha out of UCLA. Logan DiNardo to the Dolphins is a fun pick. Not so much because of DiNardo himself, but if you remember, he had a brother last year, Luke DiNardo, drafted in the 1st round as an offensive tackle by the Miami Dolphins. So the two brothers will stick together. That's pretty cool. That'll bring up the Lions. They go with Kenny Jackson. He was supposed to go in the 2nd round, falls all the way to the 4th. DeAndre Williams goes to the Atlanta Falcons. That'll bring up the Jaguars, but not for long. There's been a player who the Dragons have had their eye on for a little while, and they want to get him. They're going to be trading 2 of their 4 5th-rounders, picks 132 and 141. This is the earliest and the latest of our 4 5th-round picks, keeping the 2 selections sandwiched in the middle, and we'll also be adding a 7th. I think this is a lot to move up here, and we might be overpaying a little bit, but I cannot let this guy fall any farther. I have no idea how he made it into the 4th round. Maybe this isn't necessarily a huge position of need, but this far down the board, I cannot pass on the value. We have to go up and get him. With the 113th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select defensive back Ronrakis Barber out of the University of Alabama. So the Dragons are going to add another player in the secondary. Truth be told, I think Ronrakis Barber belonged in the 2nd round. I have no idea how he fell this far, and I get that we drafted a cornerback earlier, but look, this guy is awesome. We cannot let him fall any farther. 6'3", 187. He's a really impressive athlete, and he's got some of the best ball skills of any corner in this draft. If, hypothetically, he were to start alongside Cam Lucifer, I think the two of them would complement each other really well. Lucifer is your sticky cover guy, whereas Barber is your ball hawk. Ronrakis Barber had 6 interceptions this year for the Crimson Tide, helping lead one of the best pass defenses in the country. Obviously, the story of Alabama this year was their offense, but their defense is a big reason why they won the national championship. Barber's going to be a 72 overall with hidden development. I'm not sure how often he's going to see the field early on because our cornerback room all of a sudden is now super deep. But I think Barber's got some real upside, and I think this could end up being one of the biggest steals of the draft. Again, how he fell to the 4th round, I have no idea. But look, we're not complaining. So the Dragons move up. They steal Ronrakis Barber with the 113th pick in the draft. Let's do some more simulating now. Ryan Dawkins, another talented corner, ends up with the Washington Commanders. Roger Carter off the board of the Giants. Carter's had a very fascinating collegiate career. 5-star recruit at the University of Texas, transfers to TCU where he bursts onto the scene. In his first career college football playoff game, he had 5 sacks. That was during his sophomore year. never hit the peak of the mountain, and as a pass rusher, he really went down his last 2 years, leading to him only going in the 4th round. Nearing the conclusion here of round 4, Houston with back-to-back picks adds some pass rush to the arsenal. The Ravens go with C.J. Carter Jr. from Stanford. Jonathan Waters out of Oregon to Atlanta. That's a pretty good pick. Antos Forey out of USC. Also a pretty good pick to the Cowboys. And then the Colts are going to trade the final pick of round 4 to the Niners for Trey Lance. Very interesting trade here. So the Colts are kind of stuck with Anthony Richardson for at least one more year. Richardson threw 28 interceptions last year. But the Colts see this as, why not take a shot on a guy like Trey Lance, while the Niners make another really good pick with Harold Hicks Jr. out of Toledo. So that'll wrap up the 4th round. Certainly a busy one for the Dragons as they add Jabril Fofana from Nebraska. And then they move up for Ronrakis Barber. We now only have 2 picks in the 5th round after ending up with, I think, 5 last year. And both of those picks are coming up pretty soon, within the first half of round 5. Still plenty of talent to be had on the board. A few guys who really should have gone on day 2 have made it here into round 5. And I think this is where the best front offices in the league really separate themselves. Their ability to draft on day 3. And we've got a real opportunity to add some talent. Our number 1 target was guard Kekoa Kalayani out of the University of Miami. He ends up going to the New Orleans Saints. He's only 20 years old and ended up being nearly a 70 overall. Leon Sandcastle, the corner to the Texans. That's a steal. Biggest bird to the Buccaneers. That's a pretty good pick. And then the Dragons are on the clock. We've got 2 of the next 3 picks here with round 5 pick 8 and round 5 pick 10. There's multiple players I really like. I don't see any reason to trade. With the 8th pick in the 5th round of the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Tornado Davis II, running back out of Houston. The Dragons drafted one of the tallest players in the draft at 6'7" in the last round, so now they're going to draft someone who's 5'6". Tornado Davis, I think, is going to be a really fun player, though. Even though he's short, he is a tough physical runner at his size, and there are not many 5'6" guys who run like him. When you see a short player like him, you look at a gadget player, somebody who you're going to use on kick returns. No, Tornado Davis is a true running back. He knows how to make plays in between the tackles and outside the tackles and the numbers. He's physical, he's athletic, he's explosive, and he's shown flashes in the passing game as a receiver. If he ends up being the player we think he is, I think he could be a really good complement with DeAndre Swift and David Montgomery in our backfield. Davis is only 21 years old, and with his physical style of running, I think he's going to fit right in. Davis officially comes in as a 71 overall with hidden development. And at just 21 years old, I think this guy's got a lot of room to grow. I think he could very well be our lead runner within a few years. Once DeAndre Swift gets older, I think he could be the guy here in round 5. I think we found ourselves a real gem with Tornado Davis. The Dragons have another pick, which is about to be made. Only one team in between us. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. And sure enough, they will end up selecting Xavion Cherry, the talented receiver out of Notre Dame. He was not the next guy on our board, although we did like him. So that'll bring us here to round 5, pick 10. And again, we're not going to move down. We're going to pick a player. With the 10th pick in the 5th round of the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Orlin Babylon, defensive tackle out of LSU. So Babylon will be the selection here. He was paired up inside the LSU defensive line with Sir Broderick Hillingham, who obviously had all of the fanfare and the attention. But maybe it was Babylon who all along was the better player. Babylon's numbers at LSU aren't the most impressive. He's not racking up the big tackle for loss and sack numbers like his teammate is. But he draws a lot of doubles, and he's a really good run stuffer. I think he's a really high floor player. Maybe not necessarily somebody who's ever going to be like a Pro Bowler or anything, but he knows how to stuff rushing lanes, and I think he can be somebody who plays a lot as a rookie. He reminds me a lot of DeJuan Overton, who we drafted in the 5th round last year as a guy who's going to be a really good run stopper and is going to be able to play right away. Overton made some nice plays as a rookie, and I think Orlin Babylon's going to have a pretty similar impact, coming in as a 72 overall. So again, I don't think we're looking at some future superstar, but for the 5th round, a guy who can at least play is all we can really ask for. So Orlin Babylon is the selection here for the Dragons as they pair him and Tornado Davis II with their 5th round picks. The Dragons currently only have a few more picks to go, None in the 5th. We'll see if the Dragons eventually move back up into round 5, as we have an obsession with picking in the 5th round. Iwan Moorhead out of Moorhead State goes to the Panthers. S.K. Doumbia, really talented player out of Auburn, goes to the Bears. And then we've got another trade. Greg Dortch is on the move to the Vikings for the 145th pick. This trade physically hurts me to make because I really like Greg Dortch. He's been one of my favorite players on the team over the first 2 years. He's been a really fun guy to have and a really enjoyable player. But our receiver position is too crowded, especially with the addition of Arturo Modelo in the 3rd round. So with the 17th pick in the 5th round of the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Pea Puitatia, offensive tackle out of Oklahoma. It says he's projected to go undrafted, but I don't think projections really matter anymore at this stage in the draft. If there's a player you like, you just got to go and pick him. Puitatia is a really interesting guy because I think he's really athletic. He's going to be one of the fastest and quickest offensive tackles in the entire league right away. I like his ability as a pass protector, and he's played in a very pro-styled offense at the University of Oklahoma. I wish he was a little bit more consistent in the run game, but he's got plenty of time to improve upon that. With the signings of Tyron Smith and Jedrick Wills in free agency, he's not going to have to play right away. But at just 22 years old and at good size and length, I think he could be a solid player down the line, coming in as a 70 overall. For round 5, this is a pretty solid pick, and again, it sucks to trade away Greg Dortch, but we don't really have a spot for him on the roster, whereas we do need offensive line depth really badly. So the Dragons finally draft an O-lineman here in the 5th round after not picking one earlier in this year's draft, thanks to spending on it in free agency. So it looks like the Dragons are going to end up with 3 5th-rounders. They don't have another one, but we've got the top pick in round 6 waiting for us. Ronaldo de Maldonado ends up with the Jets, the center out of the University of Nevada. Washington adds Rocky Jenkins. The Vikings go with Sammy Vienna, the pass rusher out of the University of Delaware. Dwayne Hoyt finally off the board. He was supposed to be a day 2 pick, falls all the way to the 5th, where he's drafted by the Giants. Zachariah Flanagan to the Chargers. Wakesa Adebayo, great pick by the Texans. Houston's having a nice draft, as is Washington, as they select Obo Obokonkwo. Javonte Washington, quarterback out of Ole Miss, to New England. That's a fun pick. Trey Layton goes to the Bears. The Cowboys get Jalen Augustine Marcy. And then Christopher Whitlock, the pass rusher out of Georgia, goes to New England. So the Dragons started this 5th round with 2 selections, adding Tornado Davis II, the running back, and defensive tackle Arlen Babylon. They then trade away Greg Dortch, the Hail Mary hero from Season 1, over to the Vikings in order to select Pea Puitatia out of Oklahoma. The Dragons don't have to wait too much longer for their next pick, as they are up to start round 6. With the first pick in the 6th round of the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select offensive tackle Royal Osuchua, bless you, out of the University of South Florida. So the Dragons are going back to the offensive line with Osuchua. He's going to come in with normal development as well, but I think he's a pretty intriguing player too. Another guy who's really athletic, tested well at the combine. I think he's a little bit less polished, though, than Pea Puitatia, who we drafted earlier. But lucky for us, again, we signed 2 really good tackles in free agency, so that won't need to be an issue. I don't think Osuchua is as good of a pass protector as Puitatia, but I think with his strength and toughness, he could be a really good run blocker at the next level, coming in at 6'5", 325 pounds. He's a 68 overall, but he struggles in the other archetypes as a 56 in pass protecting and agile. So he's a lot more raw than the other tackle we drafted, but I do think he could be a pretty good player, and for the 6th round, I think that's a pretty solid selection, adding some more depth along the offensive line with a guy who maybe becomes a starter down the line. Isaiah Ivey to the Colts. Durham Brown, quarterback out of Syracuse, to the Rams. He's now going to share a QB room with Deshaun Watson. Poor guy. Hopefully he's the starter there sooner rather than later. Shakir Kalei to the Titans. I think that's a great pick, the corner out of Oklahoma. We probably would have looked at him had we not drafted 3 defensive backs earlier. Ariel Dominguez and Chaka Nwodusu to the Jets. 2 very interesting picks. Dominguez is a smaller running back who's very quick and shifty, whereas Nwodusu is one of the most athletic players in the draft. Look at his ratings. The guy is a total freak. He's only 20 years old, but the problem is he's not a very good football player. Nonetheless, for round 6, it doesn't hurt to take chances on high athletic flyers. Armin Osgood to the Bills. Martez Alcott finally off the board to the Chargers. He was supposed to go in like the second round. Steel Covey to the Falcons. Arthur Smith really couldn't help himself here, could he? Covey's a 75 overall, the fastest player in the draft. I don't know how he's going to play because they have Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier. They drafted Jazir Salam in the 3rd round. I guess Covey probably won't be used as a running back, maybe as a receiver, certainly on special teams, or knowing Arthur Smith, he's going to get the ball like twice a game. We've got a fullback here in round 6. Joey Francisco to the Bears, while New England selects Row Ya Boat, the corner out of Miami. That'll wrap up round 6. Nothing too crazy as the Dragons select Royal Osuchua, the tackle out of South Florida. Due to a trade earlier today, the Dragons now have a selection in the 7th round, likely their final pick of the draft. That's the 7th pick in the round. Bernard Cunningham to the Packers. That's honestly a really good pick here for round 7. Just a couple picks to go. We've got some more fullbacks. There's Andrew Hatchet Hayes out of Michigan to the Broncos. I unironically considered a fullback here, particularly Hatchet Hayes, but he's off the board, so I don't think we're going to be looking at a fullback. With the 7th pick of the 7th round in the 2025 NFL Draft, the St. Louis Dragons select Chance Matamolo, quarterback out of Washington State. So the Dragons are going to wrap things up with a QB and what appears to be a pretty good one. Matamolo comes in with hidden development. If he ends up being a good player, this could be a really interesting asset we have on our hands. Matamolo's played a lot of football, a 4-year starter at Washington State, and a guy who has significantly improved each and every season as a starter with the Cougars. I think he's basically Puma Whitlock, but worse. He's pretty mobile, he's pretty accurate, he can make throws on the run, and he's got a solid arm. There aren't really many overall weaknesses to his game other than consistency as a passer. But other than that, I think he's pretty good. And for the 7th round, yes, sign me up. He's already going to be one of the better backups in the league right away. And assuming he develops, he could become a starting caliber quarterback. Now, that probably won't be for us unless, God forbid, something happens to Puma Whitlock, which if it does, the fact that Matamolo is a similar enough player means we'll still be able to function the offense just fine with an injury. If Matamolo develops, then maybe he could be used as a good trade chip down the line. For the 7th round, that's a great pick. You know what else is a great pick? Keyshawn Porter to the Lions. So Porter was Texas A&M's quarterback over the last 4 years, and similarly, he's improved in each and every season with the Aggies. He's super athletic and has been asked to play receiver by the league, but if you look at his ratings at QB, he's a 72, which is higher than Amari August, who the Lions drafted in the 1st round. So could the Lions have an interesting QB controversy with a couple of their rookies? Let's make it through the rest of round 7 pretty quickly. The Dragons don't have any more picks left, and I don't plan on making any more selections. I feel very satisfied with our draft. Got a few running backs coming off the board. The Giants got a quarterback, Jalen Timber. Thready Crawford finally off the board. Started out the year as a possible 1st rounder. He ends up barely getting drafted. Hasheem Walters from Arizona State is a guy we kind of liked. He ends up with Houston. Just a few more picks to go. Raymond Romanov to the Ravens. Lee Juan Chen to the Bears. Wataru Lee goes to the Cowboys. And New England gets the honors of Mr. Irrelevant. The Dragons have one pick in the 7th in which they draft quarterback Chance Matamolo, a selection that could end up being a really good one. Mr. Irrelevant, by the way, ended up being Kirk Cherry, a safety out of Texas. With this draft in the books, I think we did a really good job adding Lucifer and Saluni to really help the defense. Ronrakis Barber, I think, is going to be a total steal, while adding some playmakers to the offense with Arturo Modelo and Tornado Davis. Chance Matamolo in the 7th round as well, I think, could be really interesting. Some other draft classes I want to highlight. We'll start with San Francisco. They killed it. Their top 3 picks are all going to be great. The Lions is going to be fascinating with the quarterback situation of Amari August and now possibly Keyshawn Porter. The Rams in our division, they hit on their early picks, and they added Deshaun Watson. I thought the Saints had a really good draft, not just with Callaghan October #1, but down the board, they added some really good players on offense. Seattle had a phenomenal draft, too, adding 3 new starters to the secondary. All 3 division rivals had a really good draft. The Steelers only had 4 picks, 3 of which were used on the defensive line. I thought that was funny, and they drafted 3 good players. I thought the Bears did really well moving up for Marmaruka Zilli. The Broncos did really good with Tayron Wilson in the 1st round and then moving up for Zachariah Drake. I thought Cleveland did a solid job, obviously getting Dasani Madison and being able to trade away Deshaun Watson, the Colts had a really good draft, drafting the highest rated player in the class in Russell Bradshaw. So let's take a look at our schedule. We'll start the year on primetime. Monday Night Football against Seattle. Our home opener will be the following week against the Jaguars. We've got 2 more primetime games, both on Monday night. Week 5 against the Texans, and then Week 17 against Carolina. I haven't decided if next episode will be 1 game or 2 games. But let me know what you guys thought of this draft down below. I thought we did a really good job. I think we ended up with a really good class, and I'm excited to see how these guys contribute, not just this year, but beyond. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. As you guys know, these draft videos always take a very long time to make. Peace out.